Hello, I'm Joanne Gallagher, your Think Future podcast host. Today's guest is Molly Jones, a practicing architect, sustainability consultant, and an expert in design build in the US. She is the founder of Jones Design Studio and joins us today to share her insight into what it means to design a real future for future generations. This podcast is brought to you by Arcons, a global leader pioneering solutions and services to the construction and manufacturing industries to support digital transformation for the built environment and smart manufacturing. Visit arcons.world to learn more about how Arcons are helping organizations design, build, and solve through digitalization. From Arcons to you, welcome to our Think Future podcast series. Each week, we'll share conversations with industry leaders from around the world to find out how they're thinking future. Subscribe to Arcons Think Future to access more episodes, interviews, and profiles. Molly Jones is a highly accomplished architect and nationally recognized expert in design build consulting. With over 30 years of experience in the field, including 2 decades specializing in design build, Molly now serves as an owner advisor. She helps state and federal agencies navigate project delivery, acquisition management, and design build best practices for projects of all sizes and complexities. Welcome to the program, Molly.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you're an architect with many years of experience and you're based in Arkansas. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're focused on at the moment?
Yeah, I will. So about 30 years of experience, more decades than I care to admit, actually. So, and I started out my career just as a young architectural intern doing a lot of retail projects. So which is very repetitive in nature, and found myself about 6 or 7 years into my career kind of wondering what I was going to do next. So we all go through periods in our lives where we get to those forks in the road and we wonder, okay, what's next for me? So this was one very significant one that kind of put me on the trajectory that I'm still on today, even though I've had other little mini forks that have come in along the way since then. But at that time, I was really trying to kind of figure out why I would stay in architecture. Did I want to stay in architecture? What did I really want to do with it? And so I actually purchased a book, which I just repurchased literally this morning, another copy of it called Zen and the Art of Making a Living. And I went through this book, it's in a workbook form, just really looking at who I was as a person and what I wanted to do with my profession and what opportunities existed to align the two. And that exercise led me to a real pivotal moment in kind of orienting my practice towards sustainability. And that was a while ago, right? Over 20 years ago, so 23 or so now. And so after I kind of realized this is what I wanted to do, this is what fit with who I was, and I looked for opportunities to get training on sustainability and get at the time, my LEED certification, or credential, I should say. Buildings are certified, people have credentials. So my LEED accreditation. And I was the person who was looked over for that training at my employer's office at the time. And so I just took it upon myself to teach myself. So I got the material. I learned everything that I could. I took the exam. I passed it. And of course, started to look for opportunities to use that within my everyday life, at my profession, at my work, my employment. And I didn't find it there. What I did was I found opportunities with my professional organization, with their local chapter. Being an architect, I was a member in America, in the US. I'm an American Institute of Architects member. And they have chapters all over the US. And I was involved with my local chapter and was one of a couple of co-founders of their committee on the environment. So this was my outlet. This was how I was going to express my interest in sustainability. And we really began to try to move the needle in our local, at our city level, local level on sustainability. and apparently made enough of an impact with my employer, all the time not being, acknowledged that this is what I want to do, through my day-to-day employment, but they saw what I was doing. And when our director of sustainable facilities was no longer with the organization, they gave me that opportunity to step into that role. So I think my message would be to people, just like generally, like if you're not doing what you love day to day, do it, volunteer for it. Find a way to make it obvious that you have a passion and what that passion is, and it will likely be recognized at some point in the work that you do during the day. So I stepped into that role. I served as the director of sustainable facilities for that organization I was there for about 13 years, and then left their employment to found my organization, Jones Design Studio, and that was 11 years ago. We started out as strictly sustainability consulting, and also doing some architectural design work. And since that time, over the past decade, we have decided, we're no longer doing architectural design formally. We're still involved in sustainability consulting, but we really found an opportunity that was kind of how I got connected to DBIA, which is the Design Build Institute of America. And we had an opportunity to join a team that was serving as what's called an owner advisor. In the design build world, that's a relatively new term in construction generally. In design build, what that means is someone who comes alongside the owner and guides them through the process of design, acquiring services to have a project designed. So there's architects and engineers on the team. And there's the contractor, and they're all on a single team. And there's one contract between the design builder, which is the design build team, and the owner, which really circumvents a lot of problematic challenges that can come up on projects, kind of pretty much across the board. And I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it because I saw a real opportunity to help owners understand their sustainability goals and get them written into the procurement documents that then are used to contract with designers and builders in this design build world to execute their performance requirements in ways that are incredibly innovative. And I love it so much that I've never looked back. So
wow, you're so passionate.
Yeah, and today that's what we do mostly. We do a lot of owner advisor work, and we still do sustainability consulting. We're not doing architectural design because we really have found that through owner advisor work, we can really help owners make an impact that's even greater than it is when we're in a different position on the team. So that's why we do what we do.
That's a really inspiring story. And thanks for explaining the owner advisor piece, because it seems like you found a gap and you saw a need and you wanted to fill it, which is really inspiring. The design build system you mentioned, is that a trademark or is that a particular platform? Because maybe it's US only, or what is it? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so design build is a term that is used. It's considered a project delivery method. And the project delivery methods are the way that we organize ourselves as architects, engineers, owners, and contractors to design and build buildings or infrastructure. So roads, bridges, water, wastewater, anything in the built environment. Right. And so there are different ways that we are organized and different ways that we contract with each other to execute projects. The one that we call in the US traditional project delivery is really what's called design bid build. It's a very linear process. The architect has a contract with the owner and is usually the first contract that's executed. And that architect then advances the design, right, of the building, or if it's an engineering firm advancing a roadway or infrastructure building, to a point where a contractor can take that and produce a cost, which we call a bid. And that bid then is presented to the owner, and usually there's a handful of them that come in, right? And the owner says, okay, I'm going to select this a particular contractor based on their bid and their alignment with the drawings and specifications that we've provided them. Oftentimes what happens is so that contractor then has a separate contract with the owner, right? So you have three parties, two parties have a contract with the third party, which is the owner. And so the owner by default kind of ends up in the middle often. And so because there's no contractual relationship between the designer and the contractor, there can end up being a little bit of a rub on a project as it goes through its process. So that's design bid build. Design build takes that two contract and makes it one contract. So the designer and the builder are both under that single contract. So while design build is not a term that's coined by the Design Build Institute of America, DBIA, what DBIA has done is they have, through many, I'm going to say hundreds, because I know a lot of the people who founded this organization have a tremendous amount of experience and research to bring to bear. They crafted what they call the best practices. So they took the very best results from the projects that they had been involved in, and they came together and developed a series of best practices. I think the first version of that came out in 2014. I actually worked on my first design build project about 10 years before then. So it was before the best practices were written. And at that time, I was in the architect's seat, not in the owner advisor seat. Those best practices were just updated again in 2023, in March of 2023, again to represent what is the most current best practice in use today, at least in the United States. So yes, design build is a project delivery method. It's a way that we organize ourselves to design and build projects. And there are also organizations across the country that establish these best practices, and DBIA is the one that's in the United States.
So it's helping to keep people out of silos, communicating, being accountable, everything being transparent.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
On time and on budget, I suppose, is the main objectives. What the percentage of the US use this system? Is it government mainly, or private, or both?
So it's across the board. What I will say is that it's very fortuitous that we're talking today, because today, which is the day that the new research came out from the FMI Consulting on design build use in the United States. And that new updated research shows that by 2028, so that's a little less than 3 years from now, 47% of all the construction dollars spent in the United States will be using design build delivery system. For all the reasons you just mentioned, it's very collaborative, it's very fast. So I don't think there's anything out there that can beat it on speed. It requires an integrated team. So both the design build team, all those members on that team are integrated and working in a collaborative environment, and then doing that with the owner as well. So it really positions teams to achieve project success on really any type of project. But what this report actually says is that it's great for every type of project, but it's also critically good or even more impressive on projects that are large and complex. Now, we think as architects, large and complex is one thing, but the thing is, when I look back over my 30 years of practice, the practice of architecture and the way that we design buildings and the systems that are in buildings are much more complex today than they were when I started practicing architecture. So when we really think about large and especially complexity in buildings, they are more complex today than they ever have been. And yet there's also a movement to try to simplify them as much as we can. And that's where sustainability can really come in and provide innovative and elegant solutions that leverage what is available to us naturally in the environment and on the site for that specific building, and then meet that problem that's defined for that project, right? What its goals and mission and objectives are, with a solution that leverages those things that already exist, and then marries it with elegant systems that are put together in hopefully a very simple way that yield really extraordinary results. That's what I'm really excited about. So
I think sustainability comes down to design, for operational and embodied carbon, and these outcomes and the results, sustainable outcomes you're looking for, then you just design them for that longevity and for that fit for purpose for many, many years, etc., and to fit in with the natural environment. And so that, I'm not an architect, but I think like that. So I think this is a really exciting profession that you're in, that you get a chance to shape that and use design build as a tool. It sounds like it's a really valuable tool. What is the nexus actually between project delivery and sustainability outcomes? When you're talking to an owner, where do you begin those conversations? Let's say they don't have awareness that you do, and you're beginning from scratch, sort of educating them, bring them along on the journey. How do you approach them?
Yeah, so my experience has been that oftentimes we don't give enough attention to how important that selection of a project delivery methodology or system is to the outcomes that we want to see on the project. And usually, because we're human, right, we like to do things that are repeatable. And so if we've got a long history with a project delivery method, we may just say, you know what, this is what I've been using. We're going to continue to use it. And so we see where, we can come in and have a conversation with them about, your goals for your project and how we organize ourselves to execute the project. We can support those goals better if we take another look. Even if we've already looked at them on the project before, let's take a fresh look at this next project and how each of the project delivery systems can help us or hinder us. Okay. There is a mindset component to design build that is critically important for establishing a culture across the entire project team. And it starts with the owner's team, a culture of collaboration and mutual respect and trust, right? And that culture is really, really unique to design build. Integrated project delivery also has it, but we don't use that as much in this country. And so with design build, creating that culture in the owner's organization can be something that takes education. It might take some time. It may even take, some folks on the owner's team, maybe they can't make the mental shift, which, it happens. We're human beings, and sometimes that's hard to do. And so we may need to make some team changes within the owner's team themselves. We also find that happens sometimes with the design builder team too. We may have a little bit of a mismatch of a mindset within that team. But when you can create a team and create an environment in which a team is encouraged to collaborate and innovate and be integrated with each other, and then you give them a set of performance requirements that really define the problem and not the solution of the project and what the outcomes should be, and reward them for going beyond that, like you spark that creativity and that innovation in a way and at a level that it's really difficult to do with other project delivery systems. So, and part of it is because everybody's under one umbrella, right? So they all work together to achieve the goals. So,
and how much are you involved with that selection of the team? Because you probably have a lot of experience with people and dynamics and psychology a little bit and coaching. What are you doing in this whole piece?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the first thing we're doing is we're making sure and working with owners to make them kind of morph them, if they're not already there, morph them into what we call an owner of choice, which is an owner that demonstrates to industry that they are following the best practices. And in this context that we're talking about today, it's the DBIA best practices. And what that does, at least in the United States, is it signals to industry, the design builders out there in the country that, oh, hey, this is an owner that gets it, that is parroting back to me that they understand the best practices and that they're committed to following them. And that's an owner of choice, and that's who I want to work with. So the very first thing that we do is we set owners up to be viewed through this lens as an owner of choice. And then just because of that, right, we also do market research and we do other things, and we contact design builders to get their interest in the projects that are coming up. But then, they're attracted to that project because of what that owner is saying, both in a request for qualifications and then also in a request for proposal, which are just documents that support two phases of the acquisition process. And that signaling to industry is what gets their attention. So these design builders, especially in the economy that we're currently in, we have a lot of projects that are being put out there for acquisition in the procurement process. And the best design builders they've got a stack 20 projects deep of opportunities. So our job is, number one, to make sure that these owners' opportunities float to the top, right? So that they get the premier design builder's attention. And then we know we're getting the best of the best, right? So we're shortlisting. Let's say we get, we'll just throw it out as a dozen. Let's say we get a dozen requests in saying, hey, here's my qualifications. Pick me. I'm a great design builder. I want to do your project. We can down select to the 3 most highly qualified when we're using a best value procurement under design build. And we then take them through the next phase, which is basically a mini design competition to arrive at the single most highly qualified design builder with the best proposal that is under or at the budget and on, committed to a schedule. And that's, in a very general nutshell, what happens in best value design build. There's another type of procurement in design build, which is called progressive design build, in which that first kind of phase where we're down selecting or shortlisting the 3 most highly qualified based on qualifications, we're actually going to the single most qualified design builder. And then we're advancing the design together in collaboration with each other, the owner and the design builder, to arrive at a level of certainty about the scope of the project, right? What does it entail? What in vertical construction, buildings, it's like, what spaces are they? How big are they? How do they perform? And how do they relate to each other? The schedule of the project, and then also the cost. And once we get to a level of certainty on those 3 things, then we're executing a second or a modification, not a second a modification, but a modification of that project that then incorporates the cost to finish design and then the construction in a highly collaborative environment as well. So there's really kind of 2 ways right now, generally 2 ways that that design build is procured.
I was going to ask you about scaling. So if you start something innovative, do you start with a small pilot and then plan to scale it up after you've tested it, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, just generally across the board with sustainability, we usually have some folks and some owners who are kind of on the bleeding edge, right? We have some that have a high risk tolerance, right? And they're able and they want to, and it fits with their mission to go to that, to be the folks that are kind of leading the way in some of those areas. And once we hit critical mass on those, then of course the cost comes down. And then, we see, so it's really more driven by risk tolerance and economics, in my opinion. But it can also be driven by policy. And the federal government in this country has done quite a lot in the past. And, of course, that varies from administration to administration, but they have done a lot to really help lead the way and move the needle. One of the projects that I worked on early on was actually, I think it was about 20 years ago, was a series of projects for the Department of Defense. And at the time, they were looking at how do they do a LEED certification in that case? And LEED, it's LEED, it's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's the rating system that the U.S. Green Building Council, USGBC, is the steward of in this country, and the World Green Building Council across the world. And we were like partway through, if not 3/4 of the way through the first series of these projects. And they said, "Hey, can we certify this?" And I said, "I don't know. Let's see what we can do." We actually were able to certify it. We had the first LEED Silver building at the time. And in that environment that this particular building was in, there were, I think, 33 of these same buildings that were built at this installation. When we started that program, we could not find construction waste haulers or just commercial waste haulers for, when you're using a building and you're putting your recycling in your recycling bin, right? There was no infrastructure in that city to take that recycling and deal with it. It didn't exist. And what we saw over the course of, I want to say it was 3 or 5 years, at the most 5 years, but I think we really started to see critical mass hit at about 3, was that industry met what was happening at that installation and sprang up around it and rallied around it. And then we ended up with a very robust recycling program. So, owners that can take that leap, and kind of step out there, that's a very rudimentary example, but that's really what it takes. So it takes somebody either having a policy, if you're a government agency or a local authority, or it takes a private owner that wants to push the envelope to really kind of help move things in a direction that can make really meaningful change over generations to come. So.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the World Green Building Council, because our cons is in partnership with the World Green Building Council, and the Circularity Playbook came out there in 2023, I think it was, and it's all about circularity in the built environment and dealing with waste. I presume your top clients or top owners would be interested in circularity of waste. Is that right? Or what happens there?
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. And that's been going on for quite some time. The agencies that we work with, the federal agencies, I think it was probably 15 years ago, they stopped using the word demolition to a large extent of their existing building stock. It was really deconstruction. And then how can we evaluate what we are bringing to the end of its current useful life, and how do we move it into another useful life, right? So that is part of that circularity of products and resources. And so that in some form or another has been happening a little bit here and there for quite some time. But I get really excited when we talk about, when those things kind of come together in a more holistic view and approach to buildings. Anyway, that just gets me excited.
It's interesting when you change the word demolition to deconstruction, your mind shifts
totally
automatically with how you view it. And it's interesting, isn't it?
It really is.
We'll be back to the conversation in just a minute. In the meantime, here's a little bit more about our cons. Our cons has a mission to advance the efficiency, quality and profitability of project outcomes for its customers. Providing best-in-class technology augmented by its in-house developed IP and a full suite of professional services, Archons is trusted by over 40,000 customers globally. If you are looking for a digitalization and sustainability-focused partner to help you achieve your goals, join the thousands of construction and manufacturing customers globally who choose Archons as their digitalization partner. With more than 50 locations around the world, Archons can connect you to the right technologies and expertise, so you can improve your competitive position and increase profitability. Archons has an industry expert to help you navigate the best pathway forward wherever you are on your digitalization and sustainability journey. Visit archons.world to find out more. And now back to our conversation. The challenges these days we're facing with the built environment, due to severe weather events. So resilience is a different design challenge. Can you talk about how your studio is handling all of that, the resilience versus sustainability, which should come later? If you know what I'm saying, resilience is a urgent need for a lot of.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, approaching resilient design is really about understanding the environment that you're in, understanding the climate data, right? And the projections on climate data so that you can not react, right? So this is, in my opinion, when we come to resilience as a reaction to current events or recent events, that's not resiliency. Resiliency, in my opinion, and my definition of it, is building a real future for future generations, right? So we're looking at how can we design communities, how can we design buildings, and how can we design, a livable, walkable lifestyle for people that allows them to have that resilience built in to the hardscape, right? So they're less susceptible to climatic events that may happen. One of the things that does happen with design build that I find really baffling is that we have each state in the United States they put in place what they call enabling legislation, right? So each state legislature will pass laws that essentially enables certain types of project delivery systems that I mentioned earlier. So each state will, at some level or another, pass legislation that allows design build. Maybe it's best value, maybe it's progressive, maybe it's both. And that is what we call that enabling legislation. Some states actually most states, when they enable legislation, there's a sunset date on that legislation. Some states allow that legislation to sunset. And that we have seen that happen in multiple states in this country. And then disaster hits. And I won't say the first thing, because the first thing that they do and should do is, of course, help people, right? But one of the quickest things that the legislature does is they reenact that legislation. And to me, of course, you're going to reenact that legislation, but why on earth would we use that as a reaction to a disaster rather than the way that we design and build to prevent the disaster in the first place, right? And of course, probably the word prevent is a little, probably a little grandiose, because we're not actually preventing the disaster. But if we are building with that in mind, that we want to be resilient, we want to be sensitive to the climate, we understand the climate science and how it's impacting us at a macro level and a micro level. If we're doing that and we're doing it through design build, we've got everybody at the table, all those brilliant minds coming together, right, to build something. We can actually, if we do this at a large enough scale, we can move the needle of sustainability and climate change faster than we can otherwise, right? So if we're using design build in that manner ahead of the emergency, it lessens the need for the emergency reenaction of the legislation. Does that make sense?
And it makes sense. It's like put the horse before the cart analogy.
Yeah, it definitely can be. Yeah.
Is it easier to do that than try to redesign the process of legislation? I don't know. That's probably not your purview. It seems like it's out of date.
Yeah, and I don't know the circumstances under which states allow it to sunset either. So, but if we had the ability to leave that in place and maybe even allow the expanded use of other project delivery systems. And in the United States today, obviously, if we're heading towards 47% of all the construction dollars in just 3 short years, design build is no longer an alternative delivery system.
No.
It is a mainstream delivery system. And yet we still have a lot of states that are dealing with it through offices of alternative delivery systems and that sort of thing, because they haven't really made the shift and understood that it's no longer alternative.
So, Molly, could you give me a specific example of a state that let their legislation lapse so we can really understand what you mean?
Yeah, I can. And probably the most well-known example is Hurricane Katrina. When Hurricane Katrina, made landfall in the Gulf of Mexico, and the levees failed, Louisiana had allowed their legislation to lapse, to sunset. And they came back in an emergency session and reenacted their legislation so that they could very quickly rebuild. We all know the city of New Orleans was, had a lot of damage and devastation, but it was the entire area. And in fact, the last time I drove through there, that was, I think, just 2 years ago, there's still like stairs that lead to nowhere. There's areas that have not been rebuilt. And that level of devastation, it requires all the tools that we have in our toolbox to rebuild. So that's probably the example that your audience may be the most familiar with. There have been others in the United States that are more recent, but that's probably the one that would really resonate with most folks.
So the legislation was reenacted, and that meant that people could begin straight away without going through all of the hoops that you normally go through, is it?
Yeah, that's correct. Now, I will say that enabling legislation at the state level here in the United States, it enables, depending on how they write it, it enables state agencies and local agencies and county agencies to engage that project delivery system. So we're not talking about private entities. They can do it, that they don't have any restrictions on the use of project delivery methods, nor do residential, single family home residences. They don't have a restriction either. But what we do have is at that agency level. And when you have a huge disaster like we did with Katrina in this case, you really need that state, local, municipal and county government to function. And you may or may not have the ability to do that in some areas. So you need to rebuild very quickly to be able to provide services to the constituents. So
thanks for explaining that. I'm clear about it.
Yeah.
Have you got an example of a success story where things did get planned properly in the right order and it stood up to the test?
Not a specific, luckily, I haven't had a specific example with a natural disaster that has been at a large scale. So we have had, last year, we had a project that I'll use for another example as well. For a success story, but this project, the project owner required that the uplift, how do I say this in layperson's term, that the roof be attached more significantly than what is required by code, right? So the code has a minimum requirement, and they were saying, no, we want to withstand a wind resistance at a much higher level. And so we wrote that into the RFP. And that's what the owner got on that project. And then this project happened to be hit by a tornado and suffered very little roof damage as a result of that. So, it pays off to really think these things through. And these are real dollars. In this country, I'm not sure what's happening exactly around the world, but I know in this country, the insurance losses due to natural disasters are huge, right? And we're seeing where insurance companies are no longer allowing, they're no longer servicing, customers in certain states as a result of natural disasters. So when we can really beef our buildings up and put our money strategically into things that are going to allow us to be more resilient, it can really pay off, in the long run. And so part of what we try to do is really shift people's perspectives to look at a longer useful life of our buildings than what we have been doing, at least historically in the first half of my career. So
this sort of segues into water resilience, because we've had a lot of flooding around the world, and systems are old and they're not able to withstand the onslaught of nature. And circularity of water is important because the resource of water is very precious. What is your experience with water circularity in the design of infrastructure and buildings?
Yeah, so we have one project that we worked on several years ago. We were actually at that time we were the architect on this project, and it had it closed. It was a residential project. It had a closed water system. So every drop of water that project was going to use within the residence was captured on the roof and treated right there on site, which is a really beautiful prospect. And the interesting thing that we ran into is that the authorities, we call them the authorities having jurisdiction. So basically the city permit department that issues you the construction permit said, you can't do that. And we were like, what do you mean we can't do that? And they're like, well, what we mean is we can't guarantee that water is safe for the residents. And I was like, but it's a private residence, right? So what we ended up doing, we went to the state and worked with the state to help us draft we worked with the state and the city to help us draft legislation, an ordinance, a city ordinance at this point, that enabled single-family residences to seek an exception to the health department rules about water safety, and instead for them to report on their water quality, on a regular basis to the health department, rather than the health department having to come out and test their water. So that, the health department, at least in this country, they test water at the system level, right? Not at the not at the building level. And so when we're using these systems that really close the loop, at least at the building level, it really can cause a lot of concern for different agencies and authorities having jurisdiction, and we need to find ways to kind of work through that. So that's been, in my experience in this country, that has been the biggest challenge, is to help people help us all work together to find ways where we can do it, instead of just saying we can't do it. Like, there's other ways to do this. So when we talk about circularity of water, and we talk about closing systems down so that we're generating the water that we need, that's really where the rub is, oftentimes. So
that's quite a breakthrough.
Yeah.
And so circularity here in recycling in Australia, there's a perception, the public has a perception that it's not good enough standard. And there's an education piece. And, has that happened, that education in America, or how is that communicated?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It varies from location to location, like how good the communication is and the understanding at the citizen level about recycling and basically just waste management generally, even just at the single human level. And so what we find is that certain areas of the country are much more sophisticated about it than some others. And while I would love to see us all kind of get to the same level and then raise that bar, it really varies from pocket to pocket. Where I sit in the middle of the country, we have some pockets that are very progressive about it, and all the citizens know, and everybody's doing it. And then others where, you can drive down the road for 45 minutes and they're like, yeah, what's recycling? Why would we do that? And so there's lots and lots and lots of opportunities to really help people understand the benefits of it. And frankly, the fact that it just doesn't take much effort to do it. And so oftentimes when I talk to people about sustainability, I tell them, like, look, especially if I can read the room and I know they're not all, at least side tree huggers like I am, that it's like, just all it means is do what you can, right? Just do what you can. And if we all did what we could do, and we all educated ourselves and took advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us, we would have a very different set of problems, right? The problems wouldn't necessarily go away, but maybe climate wouldn't be at the top of the list, right? So I think that's really the key, is just do what you can. So
when something is well designed, though, doing what you can in a well designed building is a lot easier than doing what you can in a not well designed, thought through building.
Absolutely is.
It just makes it easier if it's streamlined and thought through. Like the Eco Village Network have done this for years, and the way they design their houses, so it's like part and parcel. You don't even think about it.
No.
It just happens.
No, and you're absolutely right. The way we design our buildings, and this is part of the reason when LEED first came out, they had a requirement for recycling, right? It was a prerequisite. Even then, you had to provide the infrastructure in that building. You had to calculate how much waste that was going to anticipate to be generated in that building, and then what that percentage of that waste was that was recycling, and provide that infrastructure within the building. That was the perfect place to start, right? Because now we have buildings, especially if they're thoughtfully designed, that can support easily the recycling of materials. And that has expanded over the years. And I think that's done a lot to really help, at least on the commercial side of things. And what I think has been probably one of the more pivotal pieces it goes back to that first example I had, but 20, 25 years ago, where there was no recycling in the area, right? You just couldn't do it. We still did the space. We still made sure that everybody understood how recyclables how they move through the building and how they get handed off to the waste hauler and where they're located, and had everything, all that infrastructure ready to go. And then the infrastructure followed, right? So regardless of whether it's kind of chicken and egg in some ways, but you're absolutely right. If buildings are thoughtfully designed, they can much more easily support sustainability and resilience and healthy lifestyles and our own health, and just so yes. A myriad of areas that really thoughtful design can impact our everyday lives. So
that brings me to this intersection then with technology and, BIM, and you hear digital twins, and of course, our cons is in the business of digital twins and technology and digitalization. So where do you see, like, first, a new client coming to you and you want to ask them to use tools that they may not be familiar with? How does that conversation go?
Yeah, so that conversation, really where we found success is when we look beyond just the initial design, right? Like, how can these tools support our ongoing occupancy in the building? Right? First of all, how do they leverage design so that we can do it faster and more efficiently? Right. And then how do they support occupancy and ongoing maintenance in the building? And that's where a lot of these technologies are really gaining a lot of traction. And in fact, I think one of the other things I saw earlier today was about BIM and virtual design and construction, and how that is really leveraged, especially in design build, because you have this broader team. Everybody's at the table from the beginning, including the contractor. So how you use these technologies has a lot more opportunity than it does in other project delivery systems. So I think we're going to see more and more emphasis on that, on, digital twins and everything related to, digitizing our buildings. And I know that at least in this country, there's some hesitancy because of some risk and liability there, and we're trying to kind of figure that out, as we go. But I think that the opportunity with those technologies that's there is going to easily outweigh the risks that are there with those in the very near future. So.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
As we close out today's conversation, Molly, I just want to ask you when you think about the future and your vision for 2025 and beyond, what excites you the most?
Yeah, so what really excites me the most is how design build in particular, that's the world that I live in, but how we can use that and how we can educate people about working differently. When I started working in design build, it was night and day from, what I had done in my profession prior to that. And I think if we can really teach people, how that integration and collaborative environment works, and how it helps us come together instead of pulling us apart, that's what excites me, is that we can actually get to the end of projects and love each other. Right? Rather than be at odds with each other. That's what gets me up in the morning, because that's what it's all about, right? The building's great, and the building is the end result, and it serves people. And if it's done with love, and if it's done in a way that brings people together instead of tearing us apart, that gets infused within the culture of that building.
Wow.
So every little particle that's in there. Yeah.
Those are very inspiring words. Thank you so much, Molly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. This podcast was brought to you by Arcons. Arcons is leading the digital transformation of the construction and manufacturing industries, providing best-in-class technology solutions from world-leading partners and their own in-house development software from the Arcons B-Smart portfolio for building, infrastructure and manufacturing, and a full suite of professional services. Arcons is a company that cares about creating and building a better world. Together we are working with industry and environmental experts, providing forums and platforms through our Arcons Think community to create conversations that matter to our future generations. We invite you to join in the conversation and participate in our Think community. Like and subscribe to our Think Future newsletter to stay up to date with the latest innovations and conversations as we advance the digital journey for construction and manufacturing around the world. You can download our podcasts at arcons.world or from your favorite podcast platform. From Arcons Think Future, thanks for listening.